Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the session number 11 of Organizational Theory and Design. And so far we have discussed the overall definitions, we have described the strategic purpose or intent, which was the process of strategic management, and then we started to look inside the companies and we looked first of all at the structures of the company. What are the various types of structures which a company can have? What are the very basic functions which a structure performs, and how different structures fit with the external environment to create opportunity for the company to use its internal resources fully. So we can see that in the creation of this fit, the other element which we will talk about is the element of environment. And from our earlier discussions, you will recall that we defined an organization as an open system, and we also gave you the example of a cell, an animal cell, which has a nucleus, which has other systems, various apparatuses scattered around throughout the cells, which are helping convert the food and oxygen through the internal transformation into some sort of product or waste from this cell. And we also identified that this cell membrane or cell wall has pores, openings through which this food and oxygen enter and this product and the waste leave. And we said that this is the supply side of the cell and this is the customer side of the cell, because these products actually go to some other cells. So in this way we said that a cell is very similar to a company. The company has a supply side, raw material, human beings, and internal processing, a nucleus, a top management, various departments, and then it also gives out its products and services and waste in the environment. So by this definition, environment will be defined as all elements which are existing outside the boundary of this organization. So all of the rest which we can see in this picture as whiteboard, all of this is environment. It is scattered around the company in all directions. Is environment here, it's environment here as well, environment here as well. So all the elements outside the boundary of the organization will actually fall under the term environment. And another characteristics of these elements which are around this company's boundary is that they have the potential to affect all or part of the organization. Like in the case of cells, for example, if the environment here becomes, the science students will understand, the biology students will understand it better. If the concentration of sodium, say, inside is 2+, but outside in the environment it becomes highly concentrated, then water will start flowing from this cell to here and it will shrink in size. Similarly, if the concentration is more inside and less outside, then water will start flowing from here to there, which means the cell will start swelling. So that means the elements of external environment directly affect the cell, and in a very similar fashion the elements of external environment of a company affect the inside of the company, a part of it or maybe all of it. So an organization is then surrounded by its general environment, but it also has an immediate environment which is called the domain of the organization, and that domain is actually its niche, where it thinks, where the company thinks it can survive in the environment, it settles down in that particular segment of the environment. So if we draw this boundary as representing the domain of the company, so now we are talking about a domain of environment which is in fact the niche which that company has carved out for itself in this particular environment. Now, environment generally The literature suggests that environment generally consists of various sectors, and there are 10 such sectors which are mentioned in the literature, and we will cover them briefly, discuss them one by one. The first sector which the environment comprises of is the industry itself. Industry means other competitors, other companies, either directly related with our company, with this company, with your company, or the company in question. Like if we are talking about soft drinks and we are a soft drink producer, then we are talking about other soft drink producers as well. For example, if we are carbonated soft drink producers, then we are closely looking at other carbonated soft drink producers, their markets, their segments, their advertising policies, the way they position their product, what they do, we closely follow, watch that. Plus, there will be other soft drinks which are not exactly like our product, carbonated soft drinks, but they could be juices. They could be fresh juices, packaged fresh juices in the forms of cans and tins. They are also part of our domain, part of our immediate environment. So we will also look at what is happening in that particular sector. So industry will comprise of our immediate competitors and our far-off competitors as well, especially if we are a diversified company. If we are a diversified company and we have multiple product lines and those product lines are not related with each other, then all the related industries and all the related companies which are there out in the environment, which correspond to our SBUs, will also become a part of our domain. For example, if we have one SBU which is preparing or which is producing heavy machinery and another SBU which is producing consumer goods, then consumer electronic goods, for example, then consumer electronic goods companies and heavy metal producing companies, both those companies will become part of our industrial environment. So that is important to understand. And industry can also be seen here in terms of what Michael Porter has presented to us, his industrial organizational or IO view, where his major focus is the structure of industry rather than the structure of market. And according to his analysis, the structure of the industry is basically an interplay of 4 or 5 forces, out of which one is the barriers to entry, the barriers to exit, the rivalry of the competitors, the bargaining powers of suppliers, the bargaining power of buyers. So we can also look at industry structured in that way. The second sector of environment, which is important, is the raw material sector. Raw material sectors will be concerned with supplies. This sector will be concerned about where the suppliers are located, which suppliers have quality, what are their various terms and conditions, how do we reach them, how do we retain long-term partnerships with them. So this sector is concerned about all the aspects of acquiring raw material which is required for producing our final product. And the third sector of environment is the HR sector or human resource sector, because we have to find people who are going to work as employees in our company, and those people are scattered in the environment, in the labor markets, in the universities, in other companies. So we have to find them and we have to tap them and we have to lure them to work in our company. So obviously this sector of environment is very much related with us, because as we can see in the diagram which we were drawing on the board, that the input side of a company will be its raw material and human resources. So our input side is totally dependent on HR sector or the labor sector for supply of labor to our company. The fourth sector of environment is the financial resource sector. Obviously, like cell cannot function without oxygen, cannot function without food, our body cannot function without blood. So companies and organizations, their bloodline, their lifeline is the capital, the finances. And they have to find ways to raise capital, to raise finances, because companies cannot raise all the required finances on their own, and there is a concept of limited liability on them. So the financial sector will include all the banks, all the financial institutions, all the creditors, all the financial advisors out in the market, and financial resource sector is an important sector because they provide us the lifeblood. Another sector out in the market is the market sector itself, composed of different retailers, different wholesalers, and the consumers and consumer groups, and the demographies, various demographies and psychographies. So this market sector is also an important sector for a company to understand, because after it has been formulated and it has started its production, it has to produce according to the desires and wants and wills of the people sitting in that market sector, and also according to the trade policies of wholesalers and retailers, and according to the norms of transactions between them. So it is crucial to understand the market sector. Aftermarket sector is the technology sector, and this sector will provide us the technology to convert our inputs into outputs. And this technology we can take use from the electronic technology, from the digital technology. So the technology is out there in the environment. Now it is up to the company to go and use that technology. So understanding the technology sector is also an important part of understanding our overall environment. The economic condition sector is actually a general environmental sector which is around us. How much is the inflation? What is the buying power of the people? What are the interest rates? What is the scenario on employment or unemployment? All these economic indicators, because they are providing us with an estimate of how much disposable income people have, how much buying power they have, how much purchasing parity they possess. All these informations are coming to us through the economic condition sectors. And we also have a very important government sector, because government is the governance of a particular country. It is giving the rules and the laws and the procedures to conduct business, and to also to address to grievances between various companies, between companies and their consumers. There are consumer courts, there are trade courts, there are corporate laws, there are corporate bodies, and the government departments to look into the affair of businesses, the public sector, not only the public sector, but the Ministry of Small Industries, the Ministry of Industry. They all are the stakeholders which basically belong to the public sector, and there are different governmental agencies as well which are out there in the environment, and we need to understand their working, and we need to have relationships with them. Then there is a socio-culture sector, which is very much related with the economic condition sector, but this particular sector tells us what are the trends in the minds of the consumers. Are those trends changing? Are the consumers also changing? Is their lifestyle changing? Are their priorities changing? Are they becoming more leisurely or more work-oriented? And what are the various trends present in the culture and sociology of that region, various customs, rites, myths, the occasions of celebrations? All these things are to be known by the company, because it is quite possible that they take advantage of those socio-cultural conditions. And finally, there is the 10th sector, which we term as international sector. If the company is catering to international customers, then obviously international sector will be very much relevant to it. Otherwise, international sector will affect the consumer tastes and demands in local sector as well, because under the influence of globalization and under the influence of so much information reaching people, they know what are the international trends and what are the international fashions and what are the international fads. So they are quite knowledgeable and quite informed about it. So from a company's perspective, it is important to understand the international sector of environment as well. So this was a brief basic discussion on the issue of the basics of environment. Now we move to more specific topics, and we straight away come to the phenomena of environmental uncertainty. Now, environment is uncertain. There is no doubt in it. It is uncertain because we don't have full information about it. As you have just seen, and as you can just see on this diagram, the environment is complex. It is too broad. It has so many sectors. So a company which is being represented as a cell in this diagram has very limited resources and limited time and knowledge and expertise to fully understand that environment. It is not possible for any company to fully understand its environment. So therefore, there is an element of uncertainty. When we talk about an environment, we are always encountering the term environmental uncertainty, and we would like to know further what is meant by this environmental uncertainty, and how can companies, how do they address this issue and how do they cope with it. To understand the issue of environmental uncertainty, we need to understand two frameworks. One framework is called the simple complex framework, and the other framework is called the stable and unstable framework, which means basically that an environment can be simple and an environment can be complex, or it could be stable and unstable. So there are, now we have to understand what is simple and what is complex environment. We have already seen that there are many numbers of factors affecting on a company, and these numbers of factors are present in the environment. We gave you 10 sectors. It is quite possible for example, we have a company A and we have a company B, suppose, and the number of factors of the environment acting on company A are 5, whereas number of factors affecting on company B are 14. Which environment will be more complex? Obviously, the environment of company B will be more complex because it has more number of factors affecting on it. So it will be more complex to understand as compared to company A, which will have a relatively simpler environment than company B, because the number of factors acting on company A are less than the number of factors acting on company B. So that decides the simplicity or the complexity of the environment. What about stability and instability of environment? Stability and instability does not depend on the number of factors, but it depends on the rate of change of these factors. At what rate do they change? If these factors change very quickly, for example, company A has only 5 factors, but they change very quickly. So we will then say that company A's environment is unstable, because these factors change very quickly. And company B has complex environment because there are more factors acting on it, but maybe they don't change that quickly as in the case of company A. So if these factors don't change quickly, then we will call this environment as stable. So now you can see that company A has a simple and unstable environment, whereas company B has a complex and stable environment. So simplicity and complexity are not directly related with the stability and instability of environment, and to further capture this, we will draw this into 4 cells, where at one end we have simple environment, at the other end we have a complex environment, and then we have stable and unstable environment. So you can see there are 4 possibilities. A simple stable environment here, and a complex and unstable environment here. And this arrow, which you can see on your screens, this arrow is giving us the direction of environmental uncertainty, because this uncertainty is increasing as we move from simple stable environment to unstable complex environment. So this is the direction of environmental uncertainty, and this type of environment, which is both complex and unstable, is generally referred to as dynamic environment, or simply we can say unstable environment is dynamic environment. But note that the companies will be scattered around these 4 cells, and some companies will enjoy a simple and stable environment, like the example which I gave you, soft drink companies. It does not change, people do not change their taste regarding soft drinks very quickly. There are not many factors affecting on soft drinks, so it is a relatively simple and stable environment. But consider a hospital, consider a university, These are complex environments because there are many factors affecting on them, and the rate of change of these factors is very quick. And in between there are combinations of stable and complex and simple and unstable environment. But the point which I wanted to make to you was to illustrate the direction of this uncertainty and the direction of this environmental uncertainty, and how we can have various combinations where environment can be simple, complex, or stable, unstable. But generally there will be uncertainty. Some companies will face less uncertainty, some companies will face much more uncertainty. It will be relative, but there will be differences in the certainty, environmental uncertainty. Now, how do companies cope with this environmental uncertainty? As we have seen, that environment will be uncertain, sometimes to a lesser degree, sometimes to a very high degree, but we cannot avoid this uncertainty. So how do we, as companies, try to manage or try to cope with the uncertainty is what we are going to discuss in the rest of this session. So there are various ways to adapt to this environmental uncertainty. We will discuss and define these ways one by one. The first way, which is commonly used to address the environmental uncertainty, is actually looking at the company and environment as an open system. That is the first way to understand that environment will be uncertain, plus there has to be a match between the external complexity and what is present inside the company. Now, what I mean by that is how much external complexity is replicated or reflected back in the internals of a company. For example, I'll refer back to the picture which I just were drawing for you, and that was a picture of an animal cell. I'll draw it again to stress this point. If we look at this, suppose this is our total environment and this is our company present inside the environment. And suppose this environment is like this. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in it, suppose. And they change. Those elements, they change at a fair pace. They change at a quick pace. Now, in order to correspond to these sectors in external environment, the literature says that each sector in the external environment requires an employee or a department to deal with it. So that means there will be 5 internal employees or departments to deal with this environment. Now, suppose something happens of the magnitude of anything, politically or economically, and this environment becomes more complex. And now we have 6, 7, 8, 9 components. Now the same company will not be able to adjust to this environment because it has far fewer elements inside to cope with the external environment. आपको याद होगा मैंने आपको एग्जांपल दी थी, अगर ये सोडियम कॉन्सेंट्रेशन दोनों साइड पे एक जैसी नहीं होगी, then through the process of osmosis water will start flowing from one direction to the other. यहाँ पर भी वो बैलेंस करना है. So now we have 4 more elements in the environment. The company can sustain if it either has 4 more positions or 4 more departments to cope with this environmental uncertainty. This is a general rule of thumb, and that is a very important application of the open systems theory, which is the first defense against environmental uncertainty, that if we don't consider organizations and open systems, then our focus will only be on this organization and we will forget about the environment. And whatever changes are occurring, we will not try to duplicate those changes inside the organization, and there will be a gap between environment and organization. Exactly the gap which is across a partition separating sodium concentration, which is perhaps 3 times here, and water will obviously flow from here, low pressure to high pressure. So इसी तरह ये match हमने create करना है. So open system theory provides us with the first defense against the concept of environmental uncertainty. And this rule of thumb, which we have just discussed or just seen, is an important postulate, is an important truth which comes out of the organizational theory. And as students, you should remember these rules of thumbs or postulates. आज हमने दूसरा postulate बनाया. इससे पहले हम एक postulate बना चुके हैं, but we did not clearly elaborated on it. Today we are going to elaborate on both. This postulate which we have formed is that each sector in external environment requires an employee or a department to deal with it internally, means कि जितना complex external environment होगा उतना ही complex internal structure of a company होगा, और जितना simple और stable या जितना सादा environment होगा उतनी ही simplicity company के अंदर होगी in terms of the departments and positions. So the rule or the postulate or the rule of thumb says that if the external environment is complex, make your internal structures complex so that you can deal with that complexity. If the external environment is simple, keep your internal system simple so that misalignment between you and environment does not occur. इससे पहले जो हमने एक rule of thumb देखा था, हमने जब हम discuss कर रहे थे structures को, उसमें we saw that a stable environment will demand, because stable है environment, simple है और कंपनी का स्ट्रक्चर भी सिंपल रखना है, तो उस कंपनी को फिर आप सिंपल रख सकते हैं कंट्रोल के थ्रू. सो अ स्टेबल एनवायरनमेंट विल हैव टॉलर ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, वेयर एज अ टर्बुलेंट एनवायरनमेंट वेयर अ लॉट ऑफ internal complexity is required will have horizontal structure, will have more departments because it is dealing with a complex environment. Whereas a simpler environment is forcing a company to go vertical, to go for control, and a turbulent environment is forcing the company to go horizontal or go for collaboration and coordination. So that is also a rule of thumb. Jitna environment stable hoga, utna structure simple hoga, one thing, and jitna environment stable hoga, utna structure taller hoga, और जितना environment complex होगा उतना structure horizontal होगा. And also there is another way of controlling this uncertainty in the environment, and that way is through the creation of buffering departments. Now, what are buffering departments? Buffer का concept I'm sure you know from your general common sense and from some knowledge of physics as well. Buffering का मतलब होता है shock absorbing. कारों में शॉक अब्जॉर्बर होते हैं, हर किस्म के व्हीकल में, प्लेन में, ट्रेन्स में, हर एक में शॉक अब्जॉर्बर होते हैं. वो शॉक अब्जॉर्बर क्यों होते हैं? वो इसलिए था कि कंटिन्यूस चलने से जो बम्प्स लगते हैं और जो फ्रिक्शन आएगी इंजन में या उसके पार्ट्स में, वो शॉक अब्जॉर्बर उन बम्प्स के झटकों को, शॉक्स को अपने ऊपर अब्जॉर्ब कर लेंगे. जो इफेक्ट इंजन पे जाएगा वो मिनिमल हो जाएगा, जो डेलिकेट पार्ट्स पे इफेक्ट मिनिमल हो जाएगा. बिल्कुल इसी तरह कंपनीज क्रिएट बफरिंग डिपार्टमेंट्स बिटवीन देम एंड एनवायरनमेंट, एंड these buffering departments could be a purchasing department, can be a very good example of buffering because they are providing a buffer or a shock absorber between the company and the supply side of the environment. इसी तरह कई दफा हम इन्हीं departments को boundary spanners कहते हैं, and boundary spanners you will understand again from this particular diagram. Now suppose we are again dealing with this company, and अब इस पे आप देखें कि departments हमने कहा, बफरिंग डिपार्टमेंट में हमने कहा परचेजिंग एक बफरिंग डिपार्टमेंट, परचेजिंग एक बफरिंग डिपार्टमेंट भी है और बाउंड्री स्पैनर भी है बिकॉज इट इज सिटिंग हियर एट द बाउंड्री. परचेज, मार्केटिंग इंफॉर्मेशन सिटिंग ऑन द बाउंड्री, R&D सिटिंग ऑन द बाउंड्री. ये सब बाउंड्री स्पैनर्स हैं बिकॉज R&D क्या कर रही है? R&D इज ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड द टेक्नोलॉजिकल एनवायरमेंट अराउंड इट. Marketing and marketing information is trying to understand the consumer psyche and the consumer environment around it. Purchasing is trying to understand the supplier psyche and the supplier environment around it. So ये सारे के सारे department जो boundaries के ऊपर बिखरे हैं, they are called the boundary spanners, and they also help us or help the companies in decreasing environmental uncertainty because they provide information. And environmental uncertainty is lack of information about environment. So if these departments, marketing, R&D, purchasing, they are providing that information, that those missing links to the companies, then they are fulfilling the roles of boundary spanners or buffers, because they are keeping the company safe from the shocks of environment, and they are also preparing the company to cope with the environment by providing it with more information. So that clearly differentiates the role of various boundary spanners, and also the open system theory itself, which gives us a little bit of control over environmental uncertainty. Now, another feature which is very common in complex environments especially is, now assume a company is in a turbulent environment. The environment is not only complex, but it is also unstable. The rate of change of the factors of environment is quick, fast. So company unstable environment में है, dynamic environment में. And imagine what happens to the departments within a company which is in a turbulent or dynamic environment. The departments of a company which finds itself in a turbulent environment will become more and more differentiated from other departments. Suppose हमारे पास marketing department है, और production department है, और HR और IT department. Environment जब complex होगा, each department will try to specialize or try to focus on its area of work so that it can cope with the environment. ऐसा करने में the cognitive and the emotional behavior of the managers working in those departments will become more differentiated. जो R&D में लोग काम कर रहे हैं, उनका R&D का फोकस बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ जाएगा, क्योंकि R&D के गोल्स ऑब्जेक्टिव्स प्रोडक्शन से फ़र्क हैं. जो प्रोडक्शन में काम कर रहे हैं, उनका फोकस प्रोडक्शन की तरफ है, और अनस्टेबल एनवायरनमेंट में वो फोकस और भी ज़्यादा हो जाएगा, व्हाट इज़ हैपनिंग इन दी प्रोडक्शन एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ अदर कंपनीज. सो द सेंस ऑफ डिफरेंशिएशन विल इंक्रीज. लेकिन डिफरेंशिएशन से एट द सेम टाइम, एक तो डिपार्टमेंट अपनी इंफॉर्मेशन नॉलेज बेसिस को तो शार्प कर लेंगे, कॉग्निटिव इमोशनल बिहेवियर उनके मैनेजर्स के विल बिकम डिफरेंशिएटेड, बट a problem will occur with differentiation, and that problem is कि डिपार्टमेंट अगर बहुत ज़्यादा डिफरेंशिएट हो जाएंगे तो एम्पायर्स बननी शुरू हो जाएंगी, उनमें डिपार्टमेंटल बाउंड्रीज बहुत शार्प हो जाएंगी. फिर वो बजाय कंपनी के गोल्स एंड ऑब्जेक्टिव्स का सोचने के, दे विल ओनली बी लिमिटेड टू देयर ओन गोल्स एंड ऑब्जेक्टिव्स, एंड दे विल हैव ए मायोपिक व्यू of the organization, and they will fail to contribute to the overall growth and overall achievement of that organization. So for that purpose, whenever departments become differentiated, and they do become differentiated in more complex and unstable environment, the need is that they become differentiated, but at the same time there is an integration between them. That is crucial. क्योंकि अगर वो collaboration हम नहीं लाएंगे departments में, then they will start acting like different parts of a system with different directions. वो direction एक करने के लिए they need to be collaborated either through a culture or through internal full-time integrators like we discussed in the previous sessions, or some other means, so that highly differentiated departments होते हुए भी they do not lose the organizational focus. They do not lose the organizational long-term focus, and that is only possible if the departments which are highly differentiated are also integrated with each other. So that is another way. Differentiation and integration of departments is another way, because वो differentiated तो होंगे in response to environment. Integration उनकी करनी है for the sake of collaboration and coordination of the company. So if differentiation and integration occurs together, then environmental uncertainty will be reduced without being at the expense of the agility of the company, or without affecting or without harming the integration of the company as a whole. So that is an important point, that various ways and methods which we have discussed so far all try to reduce environmental uncertainty. Now, another way to reduce environmental uncertainty is actually the use of design. And we have been talking about design throughout these 10 sessions, either using a mechanistic design or using an organic design. And this term, organic and mechanistic design, it actually came out of a study which was done by Stocker in England. And Stocker's study found out that when the external environment was stable, the internal organization was characterized by rules, procedures, and a clear hierarchy of authority या bureaucracy. ये जो हमने अभी बात की rule of thumb की, when the external environment was stable, तो कंपनी के अंदर फिर क्या होगा? रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन होंगे, टॉल स्ट्रक्चर होगा, ब्यूरोक्रेसी होगी. एंड दिस इज एग्जैक्टली व्हाट स्टॉकर फाउंड आउट इन हिज स्टडी ऑफ organizations. And he also found out that in a rapidly changing environment, the internal organization was much more loose, free flowing and adaptative. So ये दो important चीजें उन्होंने find out की कि जहां पर environment stable है वहां पर कंपनी में rules, procedures, stabilization, tall structure, hierarchy, authority, ये चीजें important है. और जहां पर environment turbulent है, rapidly changing है, वहां पर दी इंटरनल ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन आर लूज, इतनी ज़्यादा डिपार्टमेंटलाइजेशन नहीं है, डिपार्टमेंटल बाउंड्रीज नहीं है, फ्री फ्लो ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन है, सिर्फ वर्टिकल नहीं है, हॉरिजॉन्टल भी है, और द कंपनी इज फ्लेक्सिबल टू रिस्पॉन्ड टू द इन्वायरमेंट. उनकी ये फाइंडिंग थी, इनसे दीज टू डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स वर कॉल्ड मैकेनिस्टिक एंड ऑर्गेनिक डिजाइंस. So we have been talking about mechanistic and organic designs, and today we are in this session going to discuss the characteristics of a mechanistic form and an organic form. We have already seen, and we already know from our discussion on structural and contextual variables, especially the structural variable, that a mechanistic design will be highly formalized with high centralization, with a high specialization, with a high standardization and more vertical hierarchy. Whereas an organic design will be characterized by less hierarchy, more departments, more horizontalness, more decentralization, less formalization, less standardization and less specialization. अब ये तो हमने, we have used the language purely of organizational theory and design. If we use the language of what Stocker found out in his study, he defined mechanistic forms as those companies where tasks are broken down into specialized separate parts. इसका मतलब specialization is high. Tasks are broken down, which means departmentalization का concept मौजूद है, specialization का concept मौजूद है. Tasks are rigidly defined, narrowly defined within their functional areas. Strict hierarchy of authority and control is there. तो strict hierarchy का मतलब होगा tall hierarchy, structure vertical है, और कंट्रोल के एलिमेंट जाहिर है, बिकॉज हायरार्की इज टॉल, स्ट्रक्चर इज टॉल, लेयर्स ऑफ हायरार्की आर मेनी, सो ऑब्वियसली द फोकस इज एफिशिएंसी एंड कंट्रोल, एंड देयर विल बी मेनी रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन. ये भी स्टडी ने फाउंड आउट किया कि मैकेनिस्टिक फॉर्म में रूल्स और रेगुलेशन बहुत होंगे, बिकॉज योर आइडिया इज टू कंट्रोल. देन द स्टडी ऑल्सो फाइंड आउट दैट नॉलेज एंड कंट्रोल ऑफ टास्क्स आर सेंट्रलाइज्ड एट द टॉप ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, which means there is centralization of decision making, because all the important knowledge, all the important information, all the authority, all the control lies at the top. So that makes it a centralized bureaucratic organization. And finally, the communication in mechanistic form is vertical. Top down, bottoms up. Vertical, because bottoms up, a problem can reach the top through bottoms up, and then the decision is taken and it is implemented top down. So ये 5 characteristics जो उन्होंने डिस्क्राइब किए, इस स्टडी से, जो एम्पेरिकल स्टडी से जो वाजे हुए, वो यही थे which we have already seen in the debate on structural variables of organizations. And here we see that an empirical study also confirms what we have already discussed in the terms of discussing the structure and contextual variables. और दूसरी फॉर्म जो इन स्टडी ने, स्टॉकर की स्टडी ने जिस पे कमेंट किया, जिस पे रोशनी डाली, वो उन्होंने ऑर्गेनिक फॉर्म कहा उसको. एंड ही ऑब्जर्व्ड दैट द ऑर्गेनिक फॉर्म ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इज कैरेक्टराइज्ड by employees contributing to the common task of departments. एक तो इसमें उन्होंने देखा कि departmental rigidities इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं हैं. Employees contribute to the common tasks of the department and tasks are adjusted and redefined through teamwork. So, instead of having a very strict departmental control and a very strict vertical hierarchy, he observed that in turbulent environments, the companies usually will adjust their tasks so that they are more geared or more inclined towards teamwork and horizontalness rather than a strict verticalness. And then he also observed that there is less hierarchy of authority and control as opposed to the mechanistic form, and rules are quite few. Rules, regulations, standard operating procedures वो कम हैं. Hierarchy of authority vertically कम है, control कम है, and there is focus on horizontal complexity because number of departments will be more and collaboration rather than control. And he also observed that knowledge and control of the tasks are located anywhere in the organization. They are not only located at the top, like we saw in the mechanistic form, where knowledge and control were located at the top and the decisions were also made at the top. Here, since knowledge and control of tasks are not located at the top, they can be located anywhere. Therefore, decision making can happen anywhere in the organization. And since decision making can happen anywhere in the organization, that means there is decentralization of decision making. So decisions are not centralized at the top point, but they can also, the company can also have decision making points which are located down below the hierarchy. So that means organic form or organic design will have a decentralized sort of arrangement and not centralized decision making. And finally, he observed that communication in the organic forms is horizontal rather than vertical. So ये सारी चीजें उन्होंने describe की इस study में, और इस study की basis पे they clearly were able to differentiate between mechanistic forms of design and between organic forms of design. Now, how do the mechanistic and organic forms help a company in adapting to environmental uncertainty? That is the real question which concerns us today because we are talking about external environment. Now, we have already seen by that picture on the whiteboard in which we were drawing various complex factors in the environment and then trying to imitate those factors inside the company. We saw that as the environment becomes complex, the requirements of the structure inside the company become more complex. इस rule of thumb को लेते हुए design or structure put into action design, and design and structure put into action culture. So design of a company, if the environment is stable, then environmental uncertainty तो फिर भी होगी, कम होगी, but there will be environmental uncertainty. To cope with that sort of environment, the best answer which a company can present to a stable environment is the formation of a mechanistic form. Because environment तो इतनी जल्दी से change हो नहीं रहा, आपकी innovation की need इतनी है नहीं, आपकी creativity की need इतनी नहीं है, बार बार अपने अपने product को change नहीं करना, innovate नहीं करना. So अब जब आपने innovate नहीं करना, then you should hold on to your position, and the best way to hold on to your position is control. Or if you look at it from Michael Porter's point of view, the best way to hold on to this position will be cost leadership. Not differentiation, but cost leadership. So the mechanistic form itself has become a buffer between the company and the environment, and more so in organic forms. In organic forms where the environment outside is turbulent, changing, consumer taste changing, the financial institutions, their policies, the government policies, everything in flux, in change. And if correspondingly structures and designs are reflecting those changes in the environment by having less hierarchy, by having more departments, by having more positions to deal with those changes in external environments, by having buffers and boundary spanners, and through a culture in the company which is a culture of collaboration, which is a culture of team spirit, teamwork, which is a culture of horizontal structures, which is a culture of integration, all these forces can help nullify or reduce the effects of the complexities of external environment. So the selection of design itself becomes a buffer against the external environmental turbulences and environmental uncertainties. So we have seen that it is not only the elements of the structure itself, but also its context, which will reduce the environmental uncertainty. And when we give those structural variables, when we give them a form or a design, then the overall form or design in the shape of mechanistic or organic design will result in a culture and structure and style of management for the company, which will provide it an immunity, or which will help the company to adapt to the environmental uncertainty or the environmental changes. Another way, and that is the final way which we will discuss today, of adapting to environmental uncertainty is to get engaged in planning and to get engaged in forecasting. Now, especially if the company is large and it has a stable environment, it will have time to do forecasting. It will have time to do planning. It will have time to do analyses like pest, SWOT, internal and external matching, internal capability analysis, external environmental scanning, becoming more specific in the form of pest, becoming even more specific in the form of SWOT, seeing that the strengths of the company are matched by the opportunities in the environment, and how the strengths and opportunities are creating strategies for the company, and also looking at other factors, coming up with a strategy which will be helpful for the company in those particular circumstances. The planning and forecasting will also provide protection against environmental uncertainty, because they are providing more information to a company. It will be especially fruitful if as I said, if the company size is large and if the environment is relatively stable. But for any company which has the services of planners and analyzers available to it, the amount of information which they are bringing inside the organization will help the company buffer against environmental uncertainty, or if they are already in stable environment, will help them reduce the shocks or the effects of certain turbulences in the environment or certain changes in the environment. So planning and forecasting is another way, another tool through which companies reduce their uncertainty about the environment, because planning and forecasting basically providing them with more information. Now, it is important to note that planning and forecasting can also provide unrequired information. They can also choke the already under pressure hierarchies of a company, already under pressure managers of a company who are already suffering from information overload. So planning and forecasting needs to be done in the context of the company. So in this discussion today, we talked about environment. We talked in detail about the definition of various types of environment. We defined general environment. We defined the domain or the task environment for the company. And then we defined the 10 basic sectors which are around most of the companies. Then we went into the definition of environmental uncertainty, and we described the measurement or the estimation of environmental uncertainty by using the framework of simple and complex and stable and unstable environment, based on the number of factors affecting on a company, and also based on the rate of change of those factors. And we saw that companies could be simple, but they can be facing a dynamic environment if the rate of change of those factors is quick. For example, any company in a startup stage, in the entrepreneurial stage or in the startup phase, any company will have a relatively small domain, will have a relatively simple environment, but the rates of change of those environments will be quick. There will be 2 or 3 factors affecting on a startup company, but the rate at which those factors change could be quick. And we can also have a situation where there are many factors and they are also changing very quickly, so that environment will be dynamic and very turbulent. Then we described various ways to cope or various ways to address the issue of environmental uncertainty. The first thing which we noticed was the open system theory itself, protecting companies against environmental changes. Then various other techniques which the companies use, like having buffering departments, like having boundary spanning departments, like having differentiation and integration working together in the departments, and they all were helping to reduce the environmental uncertainty. And we also saw that the very form of the company, whether it is mechanistic or organic, the very design of the company, that itself helps the company to get adapted to its environment, to get used to with its environment, and to reduce the environmental uncertainty. And we also mentioned that forecasting and planning can reduce environmental uncertainty, because both forecasting and planning basically provide information to the company, provide information to the departmental managers, provide information to all the stakeholders of the company, and this way they can reduce their uncertainty. Now, in the next sessions to come, we will continue our discussion on environmental uncertainty, and we will go deeper in seeing and assessing other ways to reduce environmental uncertainty. Till then, it is Khuda Hafiz.